This may move a little quick to do, but you're going to be using CodePen, and I'm actually going to be using, I'm in the beta for new projects. So CodePen has projects coming out, which this would be very beneficial when they officially roll this out, as you're learning HTML and CSS. So there's different templates that exist here, but it's kind of your virtual working space. So you don't have to spin up and work locally. You can just do it on CodePen. And you have a directory structure as well as project, and you don't have to worry about like running gulp or grunt. It takes care of that for you. And the cool thing about it is you can even deploy from here and have your website be on CodePen, but deployed on your website. So it's pretty awesome. So I'm just going to use the basic HTML5 structure that comes from it.
So you have to link whoever's hosting
Yeah,
your site.
yeah.
to
So
CodePen.
yeah, I think because I haven't saved it, you won't see it here.
That's really cool. That's called continuous integration solution, right?
You could definitely say that, but this is just the awesomeness of CodePen. So, all right, yeah. So here's like my index and my styles inside here, and you can even change from the other preprocessors. Just pretty awesome. And the preview comes down here, so this is more realistic to a directory structure. So it's like working in Sublime Text. So what we're actually going to build out is kind of a quick overview of what. So this was a site my buddy and I recently did. So it was for Cub Shrub, and looking at navigation brings in a lot of different pieces and parts. So as I said, like I don't want this to be necessarily a really long. I don't want to spend like 5 hours on this, so I'm going to go through this relatively quick. I'm going to focus with this, and then kind of building these out. So one of the first pieces that I always talk about when looking at navigation or design or building out an interface is to dissect the design itself. So if we look at this navigation right here, there's a couple things that you'd want to call out, like making sure is your font family that's here consistent through the rest of the site. And if I'm building a site from scratch, one of the first places I always go into is identifying the font family and the sizes across my site. So my H1s through H6s, and then the primary font, secondary font, and hopefully you don't have any more than that, as well as the different weights. So how HTML and CSS work, you actually have to find weights to them, especially if you're importing a custom font. So doing something like Google Fonts, you also have to define the weights in there. Browsers aren't smart enough to be like bold, light, because different font families have like 300, 400, 700. It's variant on that. And the other thing, like this is interesting, so this has a pattern here of different colors. There's different ways I could approach this. I recently wrote a library, or I guess a helper in CSS to create patterns. So this is looking at a dynamic way, so it's going to always repeat the colors. So you can come up with a style pattern. It's not just limited to color, but there's different things that you could use. So it's like every nth child, I want to repeat a pattern, so I create a string, and it does that for me. So doing something like this, I could either say, I want this to be a repeating pattern, so it goes blue, red, yellow, green, blue, red, yellow, if there was the next one, green. Or I could add helper classes to each of these and make them be a specific color. So there's just different things I want to like call out and think about. The other thing is, what is the structure going to actually be? And do I want this, which is my logo, which is most likely going to go to my home page, do I want it to all be a part of this element? Does it need to be separate? What about sales item? Is sale item, if it wasn't being highlighted here and it was right here, would it be inline and then I'm going to offset it? Now looking at something like a utility nav, also where would that exist? And the reason why some of these things are important again is if we remove the styles for this, so the actual CSS, how would this render in HTML like without any styles? And the DOM that you're creating and imagining and architecting out before you actually write any code, that's what you need to like kind of vision is like what is the correct HTML element for this. One of the things that we typically do, and the way that I really like to look at navigation is, there's the conversation about mobile first versus desktop first and when to build out things. So the approach that I like to do is to try to think of everything from small screens to large screens as I'm architecting it out, and depending on the client and the project I'm working on. Typically, I'm actually using desktop because it's easier to have that conversation about what the UI will look like, and things are going to shift and change. So I don't usually show a desktop and then a mobile. But as I'm thinking it, I'm thinking about the evolution of it. And if I'm talking about content, I'm usually prioritizing it on mobile because it's easier for people to understand the prioritization of content. Because if you have a 3-column grid, it's going to actually have to stack 1, 2, 3 on smaller devices, most likely. So it's easier to have that conversation about priority when it's rows as opposed to rows and columns. Anyways, so as I'm building these out, I'm also thinking about the mobile experience here and how these are going to be actually structured. But then I think about the accessibility and navigating through this. So if I was tabbing through this design without using my hands, so just the tab feature and tab, shift, and enter, how would I get through this? What is the priority? So this would probably be the first thing, second, third, fourth, fifth, and then this, and then probably this. And I want to build out my DOM to prioritize it that way. So as we think about this, these are like the pieces and parts I want to do. And then eventually when I go to mobile, I want it to look something like this. Now, we probably won't have time to do that, but I'll show you what the final product looks like. Because this website, I think, just launched. I haven't really even checked it yet, but it's out there. So looking at this and kind of getting started, I want to create an index and say, all right, I need an image. I know I'm going to have unordered list or an unordered list here, another unordered list, and we can decide what to do with this guy. I started saying this, but I designed at 768 as a primary way, and I also like developing at 768. 768 is the width of the iPad, and when you're dealing with global navigation and the Chrome of your site, it's a good starting point because it's the most restrictive piece of your, most restrictive, I think, size that still exists today. Because 768 is not that much, especially if you have a long horizontal navigation. That's why I like to recommend starting there, because I like to have my tablet view be consistent with my desktop view. And I don't like to change it multiple times, so I would rather just work around that one restriction and then add space or scale up the font or add additional aesthetics as opposed to decreasing. It's easier for me to trickle those in than to remove them, and 768 is that ridiculous restriction. All right. Oops, I keep forgetting I'm working in the browser. Okay. Long explanation. I'm not, I'll just leave that in there for right now. Okay, so I'm going to create first a container around here, and this is going to be like my main body container. So I'm just going to say like O container, and I'm going to create this guy later on. And I talked about having an O container wrap, which is going to be my main content inside here. Oh, come on. This is the only buggy part that I realized the other day when I was working in the projects in CodePen is how it indents is kind of bizarre right now. It's funny, like they built this really amazing piece of software, but the indents are messed up right now. All right, and then I'm going to create just C page. And then I'm going to have a C page main here. So this is going to be my main content. And then inside here, I'm going to create C page header or intro. Doesn't matter. And this is where my navigation is actually going to live for the site. And I don't want to spend too much time on the HTML elements, so I'm just going to kind of focus more on traditional ones. So earlier, I talked about like it was going to be an unordered list. And it's going to have an anchor inside there for each one. And then this will be repeating. But before I get like too complex with this, I want to keep this be as kind of scaled back as much as possible, so I can start thinking about the classes that I really want to add. All right, so we have our logo, and it's going to be an href, and I don't said an href, it's going to be an anchor, and then we have an image inside there, and then place, hold it, whatever that is, and I'll go back in there, logo. We'll add a title tag. And when it comes to home pages, you can just do slashes. So that's typically the way people get back to the home page. You can also do a period, which is at the very root of your navigation, but slashes looks at the relative space that you're at. All right, so the other thing that we know we will need is another, which will be our utility nav. So I'm just going to put that there. What else? So in the case of this, this would actually be an input that would be hidden. So I would need to think about how that would be built out. But on the desktop, when I click on this, it expands out and it's not visible. But then on mobile screens, it's expanded out. So that element's hidden, but it's not there right now. All right, so these are our primary things that we need. Again, I would add in the additional pieces, and these I have little light boxes that interact with them, but right now it's not really that important. I am going to actually put the right sizes and names in here. When dealing with navigation, that's the only time that is very specific. So a lot of times when you're building out something, you want it to be about reuse and the current content. But a global navigation is really the only piece of the interface that is unreusable. It's a one-time use case for a website, and sometimes you have an authenticated side and a non-authenticated side, so that's the only maybe like variations inside there or modified versions. And e-com, adding stuff to your cart, but for the most part, it's pretty consistent one for one on a site. So that's why I like to actually work around the restrictions that we have. So for this guy, this is actually Lado. I think that's a Google font. So Google font, fonts.google. Pretty sure it is. Yeah, so Lado. And then I want to look at like the different weights that we have. Okay, cool. So if I want to embed this, this is what all I need to do. I can customize and say the weights that I need. So I actually need the multiple weights. So as I was saying, like the different sizes, like if I need italic, I include it in there. But you want to be kind of careful about, you don't want to add all these because it will start, getting a larger load time. So even that this is moderate, I kind of want to be like worried about that. So this is just regular. I don't know why it doesn't look like regular. So it's just bold. So I don't need the black. I'm just going to take regular and bold here. And now the embed code is this. And that's what I'm going to embed into my project here. Oops. Keep doing that. So that goes up here. And it has the two weights. And then in my index.css, I'm going to start doing some of my global stuff. So I said this before, almost every single project, this is one of the first things I do. Yeah. And then one of the things I like to do here is this, and then I do a font family, usually sans serif, but in the case of this, because I just got that custom font, I'm just going to take this and place it in there. So now we've installed the Google font. I like to also set line heights here from the beginning of 1.5. You don't have to do that. Sometimes you can just do 1. It's just kind of nice. So I reset the margins here, and I've done that. And then we will start getting into the different sections and categories inside, but it's pretty basic. All right. Come on. Reload. All right. So we see that image and all that. I am also going to go here and find the size of this. So this is 200 by 80. I guess 200 perfectly. And now we're going to start thinking about how these are actually coming together. So right now everything that I have here is kind of globally placed, except for what I'm about to make. So I'm going to create a component here that's just called C. I'm actually going to call it primary nav because nav is probably not specific enough. And inside primary nav, I'm going to create something that's called logo. And inside here, I'm going to put the logo. And inside of this, I'm going to create C primary nav. C stands for component. And using BEM, I'm going to call this navigation. And this is where we're going to put the primary nav. And I'm going to put this. So I don't feel like typing that out again. And I'm going to create utility. And this fun thing is going to go inside there. Cool. So looking at this doesn't really look like much. My connection's really slow. It looks pretty much the same, and it's kind of unstyled here. All right. Now, what I will do is create something like this. Make this be its own component. And I'm really like slacking on names right now. And I'm going to call it C nav CTA. So I'm thinking these as individual components and how they could be reused in other places too. And I was talking about this earlier that I like to add classes that I could later on utilize if I need to. But I try not to put them in there too much. But this allows me to have the flexibility of just styling pure CSS, because once you do CSS and DOM updates, it becomes more expensive because it's a lot more things that you have to do. You have to deploy HTML, and you have to touch the back end, and then deploy your CSS. So a lot of times I'll add different selectors that are either helpful for organization of the code, or if kind of for future proofing. If we need to change something, I have an additional selector. All right, so inside here we're also going to have the CNAV CTA. And now we have kind of a nice setup here, and this kind of highlights everything that I need. So I'm just going to copy this and make multiples of these. How many items were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so here's the 7, and my memory is not that great these days. Come on. And if you guys are trying to, if you have, kids, or if you know someone that's looking for awesome kids clothes, Cub Shrub is the place. It's in the short north. It is the owners of Tiger Tree. So it's like Tiger Tree for kids. Trendy clothes, really cool toys.
And do they deliver out of state?
Yeah, they do. I don't know why I said it like. Yeah. All right, so yeah, that's how you spell it. And gifts, and then sales items.
I forget, what is the purpose of the double pipes there?
It's just for organization. That's it. And then.
So does that apply both of those classes to that list element then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just organization. And then I'm going to call this sale.
If they conflict, who takes priority?
It doesn't. The order of CSS, your selectors doesn't matter. There's no cascading effects or specificity that's due to the order of this. I could switch this over here. This is just saying that this is, like, I don't need this here. It's just a way that I organize my code. It helps me separate the ones that are BEM related, so like a child of it, and it helps me identify what is going to be stylistic and what's going to be skin based. So if I want to remove some selectors to update or change an element, I can do that. So it's just organization. All right, so now I feel like this is come together, and we have this kind of like nice setup here and some good selectors. We are going to do the same thing here, and we're going to call this C utility nav. And I'm going to call this utility nav item. And then this is going to have a completely different look and feel. But for right now, I'm just going to leave it as is. So it's just going to be a base anchor inside here. All right, so one of the things is I'm using ULs. So one of the first things I like to do is to say C unlist. And unlist is meaning I'm going to take this utility and make it look not like a utility class. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say C unlist. Now, how I know what properties to remove is I can inspect this, look at the unordered list, look at the user agent, and see what's being defined here, padding start, and the margin top. I'm going to get rid of those. And there's also a list style that's inherited on the parent. So inside here, I'm going to say padding left 0. And in reality, one of the things I like to do is, again, putting type selectors at the top, components after, or objects, then components and utilities. I'm going to create just a reset on this so I can have better control of this later on. And I say margin top because all these have margins on there and it can be kind of confusing. So I like to start there. So with this, I have removed the padding and the margin on it, and then I'm going to say list style none. And now this has become a reset for my unlist. So they're still in their correct element, but they're kind of played here. Now, one of the things in this design that you'll notice is that they're all lowercase. So remember how I added, a selector that was called CNav? That's going to be the next thing that I'm going to add in here. And I'm going to say CNav text decoration, or text transform, lowercase. So now these are going to be lowercase. They will also be a font weight of whatever that bold was. So this is what I was saying earlier, 700. Now those are going to be bold. Should be at least. Come on. And another thing that I want to do is globally. So the only, like when you're doing types selectors, these are things that you want to apply to every single element, like use them sparingly. And these are pretty common ones that you would use, so getting rid of this. All right, so all those guys, good, solid. Did I call that something differently? Because those are not coming through. Oh, CNav CTA. That's going to look better. All right, so now they're lowercase and they're that. Now, again, remember I was talking about the different font sizes inside here. I would typically use a helper class for this, but for purposes of this, I'm just going to, God, I do that every time. I'm just going to call it a font size 18 pixel. I typically also use rems for these, but again, for today, it's going to be good enough. All right, so here we have the right font size, and we have the image, and then we have our utility nav down here. And we want to move these pieces around. So the first thing that I also wanted to do is I'm going to list these two, even though I could add a class for these. I'm going to list these out separately. Now, in the case of CSS world, I would have these as far to the bottom of my CSS as possible because they are the least repeatable. So again, like CSS, if you think about it, it's far-reaching and the most amount of reusable CSS is at the top, And then as you get more specific, it goes to the bottom of the physical file. The CSS reads from top to bottom, and that's how the overriding happens. So equivalent specificity, which one wins, is the one that comes last in the CSS file. So that's why things like a global navigation you would want to have here.
Because the global nav is one time.
Yep.
Like it's the same idea.
Exactly. All right, so for these individual pieces, there's a bunch of different ways that we could style it. Let's look at one way that I talked about earlier. So we can have item, and we can say display inline block, right? So now these are going to be, yeah, those are going to be inline. So that kind of gives me that treatment of having it. Now the other thing I could do is I could say overflow hidden, and this would be a really bad example of overflow hidden, is if I have a secondary nav, remember how I was showing you earlier in the positioning, if I have a hover state and overflow hidden, I would never see the drop down. But I could do something like this, which is a float left, and this would be another way of positioning these. So they're going to be in there and position. And probably the preferred way of doing this right now would actually be to use flex. So I'm going to say display flex. But there's a million different ways that I could do this and approach this. Flex is a really powerful way of positioning things nowadays. There's an article that's out there well, the first place I would say is CSS Tricks, a complete guide to Flexbox. There was an article recently that went to the ins and outs and all the different use cases and patterns that are common in Flex. But this, as a reference, in reading over this and playing with these ones, is really all you really is a good starting point. But it takes a lot of practice to really understand. But you'll notice that, look how nice this is. And if I add multiple unordered lists, things can be added inside here. I'm going to add in a helper class here and say use space children. And what this is going to be is the direct descendants are going to have a padding left of 20 pixels.
Why did you do that? The star plus star. Why couldn't you just do contrast?
So what this is a namespace. It's saying the direct descendant of any type selector plus its next of any type selector is going to get a padding left. So if I had this as LIs, my CSS would be, I would have to have uSpace children on a UL, and the direct descendant in the DOM would have to be an LI. The very next list item would have a padding left. So what this is saying is I could have a div, I could have a span, no matter what the elements are, it's going to work. And I can reuse this on an unordered list, I can use this on divs, I can use this on spans, and it's going to space. So I'm going to add this here. And in the case of this, I probably don't want the pipes because these are required. Because if I didn't have this, this would break the design. I didn't mean to put a pipe there. So pipes are groupings of CSS selectors. It is. I was literally, my hands are freezing as I'm typing.
So you put multiple classes in each element, just so all the elements you put in that class affect that element on the page?
Yeah, yes. So you can have multiple of them. It's alignment of the object-oriented CSS, so trying to find reuse, make things being more portable. So
Gotcha.
I can't tell if this isn't rendering or if I have a typo here. Typo. Just so you guys know, padding has 2 Ds in it. It's not, there's no shorthand there. So CSS is, not forgiving in typos. All right, so now you can see the space, but the first one doesn't have that, which is really nice. All right. Another thing that you may not think about, but you should really consider. So let me say this: outline 1 pixel solid red.
Okay, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So, you did combination of flex and padding over there, so the two made them look like that.
Mhm.
So what did flex do? I understand what padding did, but what did flex like put them up like
In a row.
rather than putting inline block? You
Mhm.
put
And
instead flex?
yeah, and flex has a bunch of different things. So I can say like flex direction. So it was gonna be by default. It's gonna be row. If I do column,
Okay.
it's gonna change the
Gotcha.
direction of it.
Okay. Yeah.
Wouldn't you need to put in, what is it, WebKit Flex?
So this has a preprocessor auto prefixer built into it. In Chrome, you don't have to. So in the past 2 versions of browsers, you don't need to do that anymore.
Is that why you always promote Chrome?
Yeah. So yeah. Well, no, not necessarily. But I use in Gulp an auto prefixer that as I'm working in my code, I target which ones that I want. So like last 2 versions, and it just appends it in the compiled version of my CSS or Sass. All right, so one of the things that you see what I have going on right here is these outlines. So if you think about it, call to action, a button should always be the minimum of 40 pixels wide and 40 pixels tall. So in this nav CTA, I'm gonna actually do that, say min width 40 pixels, height and width. Now, because these are inline and they're anchors, I'm gonna have to also put a display inline block on it to give it that padding, or the height, I guess, adjustments. Now, one of the other things that I like to do, and because we did that, we're going to have to do a text align center, so it's centered in the page. And these will never wrap. There's multiple ways of doing line heights, but I could also do this line height 40 pixels, and then I could get rid of this. So that's the same thing, it's equivalent. So right now these are always a minimum of 40, but what I could also do is, so if this had an underline underneath it, it would stop from here to here. I like to give a little space on each side for user error and for you know, a bigger click area. So I may do something like this: padding right 5 pixels and padding left 5 pixels.
So it's also like
So
accessibility.
yeah, and it's also just really nice, so I don't have to be directly over the text. I can be around it. So it's just one of those things, and I like to have space in between, so I'm highlighting and unhighlighting. But because I've added this space here, do you see how this is now not aligned here?
Yeah.
So my first one inside here, if I'm using the same approach, I would want to offset it. So I just want to offset these, a margin, left, negative 5 pixels. So these are these weird things that I think about that a lot of people don't ever think about when building on an interface, but it's kind of the difference of like really nice usability and flexibility of these. All right, so this is like a really good setup right here, and we have this image here. There's a bunch of different ways that I could center that image, and as well as the text. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's focus on the something that I haven't done is, because I've been focusing on this like grid right here. Let's also do this.
And if you, that margin that you just offset, it just looks prettier? Is that what it is? It looks better? The boys have no margin?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
for the grid. Why can't I think of what that is? Give me 1 second.
I totally don't see those things. Like if you tell me that looks prettier than the other thing, I don't know, it looks the same to
What
me.
is that wrap? Word wrap. Word wrap. What is the value that I want?
How can you see that it's prettier? Like the
Well,
boys
are you
have-
gonna like
Right.
center the container on the page? Because like right now it's obviously
Yeah,
at the edge.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to think of some no wrap.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, I'm going to
And,
do
like,
that.
Later on it's gonna be.
White space. Oh, that's what it is. White space, no wrap. Sorry, I had a brain fart. I was thinking of more sentences, not characters. So I want to avoid that from happening. Come on.
What did that do?
This should have done that. I don't know why that's not. I think it's just not refreshing.
Just for the thing not to go into rows.
Yeah.
It doesn't go.
All right, we'll come back to that. But yeah, so one of the big things that I kind of skipped over earlier, and to me, I will kind of jump around, and a lot of times when I'm starting a project, I already have all these kind of built out, but we would want to define what our max width is. So in here, let's just say max width is 1,000 pixels. So once we get bigger, it has something going on, and the margin left auto and margin right auto. So then this is going to center it once it gets bigger inside here, and I did not add that to this guy. So I'm just going to say container wrap, and then we have C page header. And I put these in the beginning because, yeah, so now that if I go bigger, it's going to be there. So the navigation here, and this would probably also have a class of like C logo. That's pretty common. And I want to center this in the middle of the page. Because this is on its own row, and looking at this UI, I have more than enough ways of doing this. So let's look at C primary nav. So C primary nav is the container for all the 2 different navigations inside of it. This guy's more reusable, so I'm going to go after it. These guys are even more specific, so this is a good spot to put C primary nav. C primary nav, again, has the logo. That was one of the requirements for it. And I could do something as simple as text align center to center the logo. I believe, yep, so it's centered in the page. Easy as that. And then the anchor inside of it, something like the logo. I can say display inline block. We can say width is 100% and a max width of 200. So what this would allow me to do is if I go smaller, it should shrink down. I don't know why it's not. Oh, it's because that word wrap just took a while. I don't know if you saw that. It's now working. Whatever. All right, so now we have kind of like the placement of all this stuff here, and it's looking good. Now for this to be centered, there's a million different ways. And if I wanted to, I wouldn't have to use flex. I can use display inline and then center it. That would be the easy way of creating this. But due to the complexities of like responsive, I'm going to actually treat this a little bit differently and how I would actually approach it for a project. Oh, and one of the other things I skipped over was the colors, and that's usually the first, like after I do text. I do have on my code pen this breakdown of how to use colors. So it's kind of my color theory that every website has a maximum of 20 colors that you can use. So I outline it. Object-oriented typography was what I was talking about earlier. Oops. I learned how to click. The color naming convention. So it's the idea of you have primary nav, secondary light, and the breakdowns of it. So identify those early on in the project. All right, so with this, what I could do is you would think that if I did text align center, that would work, but because I'm using flex, it's not going to do that. So I could say justify content, and I can say center. Come on. Yeah, it's perfectly fine. So now this is centered in the page. Okay. All right, I just have one more thing to kind of cover then. All right.
Why did justify work with text align?
So justify content is a piece of flex. Some of the cool things that you can get with flex is I can do stretch, and this is going to stretch the width of that parent container. Space in between would probably be what space between is what will allow it to scale out in between. So it calculates the width in between it, which is really nice. So there's a bunch of different ones I could do, and this is just the center one. Space in between is actually kind of nice for a navigation like this, so let's actually leave that. So it goes from one side to another, and that goes a little bit closer to what that design was. So we have that. And then as it gets smaller, that space in between gets smaller. And typically I would remember target this at 768 to get my spacing kind of right and everything inside there. And then I would want to target the mobile side of it. All right. The last little thing inside here is I'm going to take this global nav and I'm going to do the utility nav, which was its own piece too. And let's do the item. So let's just add in those 3 other ones. And all right, so those are going to be just listed next to each other. And we're going to utilize that same thing and say use FaceChildren. Save that. And what we want to do is we want to move this utility nav up here. And how we're going to do that is we have the C primary utility. So the C primary utility is about the utility nav in context of the global navigation, that primary nav, where utility nav, like the C utility nav down here, is just this navigation. So we're looking at this versus this inside of this. So when I say C utility nav, and I'm going to also add this one, even though I didn't need it right now. This would be helpful once I get into responsive and add media queries inside here. I'm going to say position absolute, and I'm going to say right 0, top 0. Oh, someone, do you mind getting that? So this is what we were covering earlier, and now this has moved that utility nav from the bottom up to the top. And the one thing here is this is it's relative to the very top of the page as opposed to where I probably want it in the navigation. So how I fix that is saying position relative. So now this is going to be aligning to the right-hand corner of this once it saves. And there's my utility nav, there's my logo, and the content inside of here. Probably the last thing that I would want to do is I like this little trick. Again, based off my kind of max width stuff, I would say at media, screen, and min width. I'm going to say 1040 pixels. Put this inside here. And say padding right, 20 pixels, and left. So now as I go smaller, oops, it's going to should add the padding on the left and right. So this is just 20 is 40, 1040 is my max width, so once it goes under 1040, it'll go on top of it. So this is kind of like a base structure of how you would take this navigation, and then you would start refining it and adding different things inside there and the different elements, but this is this would be a really great start on creating a navigation. And as I was saying earlier, the reason you also want to look at how you would navigate through this. So if I'm tabbing through this, it goes in the specific order and then goes to the utility nav. So that's kind of a base setup for a navigation, and then you would want to target it. So then if I look at Cub Shrub, which I hope it is live right now. Oh, it's not. It's the old site. All right, so I know you got to get going, so I'm just going to open this really quick. But this will be launching here soon, and you can see like the navigation and the breakdowns of this, and even like why this was like more of the clear float type of look and feel is because it has the subnav inside of it, a lot of animations, and once we go smaller, using the same HTML and DOM, and inside this like test view in Shopify, it looks weird, but I have this X that I'm animating, and the same DOM is being utilized here with the search visible, and these guys here. I'm utilizing my library that I target small screens and large screens. So if I look at this anchor right here, you can see that it says, CNav, very similar to kind of what we were just talking about, a bunch of helper classes. But I have this C at large. So this at large is what I refer to as a project called suffixcate. And then at small, I have at small. So what this allows me to do is to identify my UI and have some kind of a semantic form to show, like in a really responsive landscape, what those selectors are doing. So at the desktop, this is an anchor, but on mobile, it's a button. And it allows me to reuse pieces and not have collision. So that's on my code pen, and it's right here, nice transition. It's called suffixcate. And I actually have a YouTube video where I talk about like the use cases of this. So if you're interested in knowing more about this, you can search that. But the idea here is this is what it finally looks like when it's completed, and it's the same DOM structure, and that's basically it.
Can you show me how you put that on the top?
Oh yeah. So
Yeah.
that was a pretty basic, just using absolute position. Oops.
Okay.
Absolute position with the parent being relative. So similar to the positioning that we were talking about about an hour ago, we have C primary navigation, we have C primary utility. So C primary nav here is this whole container. Utility is that utility nav, and it's being absolutely positioned in that top right-hand corner. If I wanted to fix this, I could also make this be an absolute fix, and then I would have to offset the bottom. So that's how you make a navigation.
But didn't you clear the float?
I'm not actually using a float here. So this is using flex. So
You go so fast.
yeah, so well, I recorded this. The big thing is we can go over some questions, but like if you have questions about it, like I'll post this on YouTube. Ask questions on there. I can put more demos on Twitter, but I'm definitely, in this session, the idea was that I would continue to help you guys out after this. So if you, I know I went through this very quickly, and I hope this was able to highlight some of the pieces and parts that we talked about, from specificity, inheritance, positioning, the different display types, the how to clear floats, how to do structurals, and how to think about reusable code and how to make it be portable. So I will share this all with you. Oh, this one was? Oh, cool.
Yeah, we did into a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so, yeah, and I wanted to make sure like I was covering on some of the pieces, like how I get started on a project without getting to so much design. Yeah, that's that.
So
Still-
I just